Hello and welcome to the Science Museum. I'm Kevin Fong and this is The Engineers, the future of cars. I am in the Information Age Gallery, sat in front of an object that's called the rugby tuning coil. And 100 years ago, this big wheel of copper wrapped in wood was the most powerful transmitter in the world. So it's an appropriate place for us to have this broadcast, which brings in an audience from 5 different continents through the magic of our video link, as well as a large audience here in the gallery for a program that will be broadcast on BBC World Service, on radio and television. The climate catastrophe, the sheer weight of traffic on our roads, and the horrific rate of accidents that they cause has forced a revolution in the way that we think about cars. With me today are 3 engineers who are at the forefront of that revolution. We have Arjo van der Ham from the Netherlands, who's the Chief Technical Officer at a company called Lightyear. He has developed the world's first family-sized solar-powered car. We have Jamie Schotten, an expert in AI and autonomous vehicles. He is the Chief Scientist at a company called Wave, and he's here to tell us about autonomous driving vehicles. And last but not least, we have Linda Zhang from the United States. She is the chief engineer for the F-150 Lightning, has managed somehow to electrify one of America's most iconic and brilliant cars. Please join me in welcoming them today. Linda, let's start with you. People outside the US probably won't know what an icon the F-150 is.
Yes, it is. So F-Series is such an iconic brand, and it's responsible for $42 billion of revenue. So that's 17 million units on the road at pretty much any given time since 2020.
And it's a bit of a gas guzzler. I think it's sort of, you get 8 kilometers per liter out of it. And your role in electrifying this vehicle has made you Woman of the Year, according to USA Today, and put you on the cover of Time magazine. Were you expecting all the fuss?
For myself personally, definitely not. Not expecting any of that because it's just surreal. But for the vehicle itself, we did expect a lot of fuss because of the fact that it is F-Series and because of it being basically an iconic vehicle that's, in a way, a tipping point for the industry. Because of what it represents. In a way, if you think about what this product is and how people use it, it's not just electrifying this vehicle, but also changing the way that people might perceive what an EV can be. Trucks are generally known for being very masculine and work-oriented and being able to get things done. So people use it almost in a way as a tool. Whereas an EV, a lot of people think of it as an eco-vehicle. Those two things don't always go together perfectly. A lot of people have told me that's an oxymoron. There's no way you can have an EV truck. So a lot of it has really been trying to convince people that it can be tough and that this technology of electrification with the batteries as well as the motors actually can be more tough and in many ways a better tool for the customer.
I want to move on now to Arjo. Now, Arjo, you work in engineering solar cars, and again, no less groundbreaking here. I just want to talk about how you got drawn into that as the thing that you wanted to do. I understand that there is something called the Solar Vehicle Race across Australia. Tell me about that, and tell me about how you got into this field.
Yeah, actually, back in 2012, we were studying at the Technical University in Eindhoven. And we founded this solar car team to participate in the World Solar Challenge. But for the first time in 2013, when we competed for the first time, was the first time they introduced a new class for vehicles that not just have to arrive from Darwin to Adelaide as fast as they can, but that were also scored on how many people you take, how practical the car is, and how much external energy you actually still need from the grid. So we took a year to design and build Stella, the world's first solar-powered family car, and raced it 3,000 kilometers through the desert of Australia. And that kind of set us up for the next adventure, for Lightyear. So a few years later, after we finished our studies and we had taken this car all over the world, and we had hoped to sort of inspire the industry to show that you can, that it's possible to build a car that drives just on the power of the sun and is really efficient, very lightweight. But it didn't really happen. So at some point we figured, if we want to get this to the market, we're going to have to do it ourselves. And that's when we founded Lightyear 6 years ago.
And in this race that you took part in at the start of all of this, where you're racing across the Australian desert in solar-powered cars, I'm trying to imagine what this is. This isn't vehicles just creeping along the desert for weeks on end, is it? How fast are they going?
So this is 3,000 kilometers in about 5.5 days. Average speeds of, I think, 70 kilometers an hour. Top speeds, well, it depends a bit, but between 80 and 90.
That's really impressive. Jamie, now we've heard about electrification there, we've heard about solar panels. You're in the field of AI and autonomous vehicles. A lot of interest here, lots of hope. Why has this become your thing?
I've been interested in machines from an incredibly young age. My interest started to seriously grow in artificial intelligence when I started studying my PhD in computer vision. So computer vision is where you take images from a camera and you try and understand what's in that image. That then led to working at Microsoft in their research labs and started working on products using AI. And so I worked on the original Kinect for Xbox 360, where you would, we had this little camera, and it would track your motion. So you could stand up in front of this camera and move around. And the algorithms, the AI systems that we built, started to understand what you were doing with your body and then translate that into a representation that the Xbox and the game could then understand and use to control. And that interest has sort of evolved ever since. And the field of AI in general has sort of really advanced over the last 20 years. So you know, everyone in the phone in your pocket will have all sorts of AI algorithms, improving the quality of your photos, recognizing text, etc.
Linda, I want to come back to the iconic F-150 pickup truck. That vehicle is very much about power. Huge pickup truck, huge footprints, huge petrol engine, diesel engine underneath it that you've pulled out and put electric innards into. But it still retains that power. Just tell me a bit about how that works and how much power you can deliver out of electric motors and why that was a problem for you.
Yeah, absolutely. The power on this vehicle is actually great. 775 foot-pounds of torque, which is the highest out of any F-150, and it's 580 horsepower. It's also the quickest F-150 that we've ever built. But a lot of people have a hard time even getting to that point because they view it as it's electric. So that was partly why we had to really work through changing some of those concepts. Your initial power is actually really magnificent. It's near instant torque of 775, whereas with a traditional gas vehicle, you have the engine combustion, you have the gears in the transmission, and that torque actually has to grow. So you have a very different torque curve in a way. The difficulty with the EV is that maintaining towing, in this case, on a truck, over time, that longevity, that fatigue is something that we had to work through with the cooling system and really making sure that the cooling was designed adequately to be able to tow and haul and do all the same things that current truck customers can do.
Moving on from that point, what I really want to know is you're from the Netherlands, it's lovely when the sun's shining. When it's not, or it's pretty cloudy out there, what sort of range on average can I expect out of your vehicle in Northern Europe?
It's an electric car. You can still charge it. So if you want to drive at night, it has a battery, and you can drive 625 kilometers just on the battery. And then the solar panel continuously trickle charges this battery. And on a single day, if you're in the full sun in a good place, you may add up to 70 kilometers of range from the sun. And that doesn't sound like a lot compared to the 625. But in practice, we don't use our car every day, and we don't use it every day for very long trips, while the solar system is always on. So the way to look at it is how much do you get in a year. So in 1 year, even in the Netherlands, which is like the 5% worst countries in the world in terms of solar radiance, you get up to 7,000 kilometers per year, so more than half of the energy that the car needs for an average driver actually comes from the sun.
Thank you so much, Ayo. So Jamie, autonomous cars, I can imagine them being great in sort of North American cities with grid-like structures that set out like chessboards. Here in London, less so.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a huge challenge to solving autonomous driving in the kinds of unstructured, complex, busy environments that we have here in London and in many cities across the world, indeed. The traditional technology stack sort of uses three main pillars. One is mapping. So for these systems to work, you send vehicles, much like Google sends vehicles around the streets to map out street view images so we can navigate ourselves. But for autonomous vehicles, this needs to be done at a much, much higher precision. So we need sort of centimeter level detail maps of entire cities, which is actually a remarkably solvable problem, but very, very expensive to do, and even worse to maintain. There's another limitation with current approaches in terms of the sensors that get used. They're very expensive sensors, something called LiDAR, which is a way of sending out beams of light, laser light, and measuring the time for that light to reflect back, and that gives you a sense of how far things are away. That's a wonderful sensor. I love depth information. I used it in my own previous work, but it's very expensive, hard to integrate in the vehicles. So that's the second one. And the third one is how the intelligence for these is set up. And today, most approaches to autonomous driving are based on a very modular system where you'd sort of first try and detect all the cars and the pedestrians, and the traffic lights and whatever else you think you need. And then you'd have some handcrafted rules. So you'd say, if this happens, then I'm going to do this. If this happens, I'm going to do this. If you think about, the complexities of urban driving and the number of things that are going on, that just becomes incredibly unwieldy very, very quickly. And so these three areas have, I think, really held back the industry. And at Wave, we're really rethinking this with an alternative approach. So we've decided that we want to go after it. Although it's a harder problem in the short term, we believe it's much more scalable. So to avoid the need for maps, we're going to avoid the use of very expensive sensors and rely on cameras, which are easy, relatively inexpensive, easy to integrate, and we drive with these two eyes every day. And finally, we're going to use a more holistic, what we call end-to-end machine learning approach, where we really teach the machine to drive by example, rather than try and code those rules in by hand.
Thank you so much, Jamie. Now, Arjo, we're going to come to you, and you've made such great strides with your prototype model of the Lightyear solar car. It's expensive. What I really want to know is, when am I going to be able to afford one? When are we going to get to a commercially viable, affordable, family-sized solar car?
So it's a very fair question, right? We were founded with a mission to provide clean mobility for everyone. And obviously, the Lightyear Zero that we're selling now for 250,000 euros is clearly not for everyone. And the way to view this is, this first car is really a technology demonstrator. We're building it in a very limited series. And this is also the main reason why this first car is so expensive. So the key is in scaling up. And that's what we've planned on the roadmap for 2025. We plan to launch the Lightyear 2, with similar specs in terms of efficiency and range, and how far you can go, and the solar panel. But that one's going to have a starting price of 30,000 euros. We also have to look not just at the purchase price, but also at the total cost of ownership of owning a car like this. If you start with electrifying a vehicle, the fuel cost of actually having to charge your car, they come down by about a factor of 3 to 4. What we've done on top of that is make the electric car about twice as efficient as most electric cars on the road today. Then we create half of that energy that a car needs for the average person from the solar panels. With that, we're getting into the range of what a median family in Europe could afford.
Jamie, I think the challenge for you is different, isn't it? In many ways, it's over-promise, really. I mean, there's a lot said about autonomous vehicles, about what we can hope to have. They're not even legal in most countries at the moment. So you're the chief scientist at Wave. Set some realistic expectations here. What can I realistically expect to see in the medium-term future, before we get to the bit where the robots take over the world?
So you're absolutely right. There have been many unrealistic expectations set by sort of names you will all have heard of, saying it's just around the corner, it's just around the corner. That's just simply not how it's going to be. It's going to be a gradual transition. It's going to take time. I would liken it to the transition, let's say, between the horse and cart and the automobile 100 years ago or so, right? It happened pretty quickly in the grand scale of things, but incrementally day on day, it was sort of a gradual process, but accelerated as the economics and the safety and all the other things that came with such a transition came to bear. It will certainly be a multi-year journey, but I would very much hope and expect strongly that by the end of this decade, we will be seeing this in very mainstream use.
End of this decade, I'll come find you and find out. Okay, all right. Arjo, what's your perspective on this?
So I'm going to go back to the mission statement of Wiltshire again. So clean mobility for everyone. And we talked a bit about total cost of ownership of a car that you buy. And the biggest factor we now have is the purchase price. And I think that's where autonomous driving is going to really help, because then we can well, the key to cost down is sharing, making sure that we use the car with a lot more people, because it's standing still 90% of the time. And the key to making sharing convenient, I think that's where autonomous driving comes in, by making sure the car acts like an Uber without a driver that you call, and within 2 minutes it's in front of the door and you go there. And if you want to bring your drywall panels, an F-150 pulls up, and if you want to take the entire family and all your kids, a minivan pulls up, and if you're just by yourself, maybe a super small, super efficient thing pulls up. That way, we can drastically reduce the cost per kilometer of actually driving. So I think that's where autonomous driving comes in. But it has to progress before this happens. It has to progress to the point where we price autonomous driving based on its cost and not on its potential value. Because I think the first companies who are going to be able to offer the service of autonomous driving, they're going to say, we're replacing a taxi driver. Taxi driver costs X cents per kilometer, so we take 10% off, and we can make a hell of a lot of money because we need to earn back the 100 billion we invested. So until we get that cost down really to what it actually costs to operate, plus a small margin, then I think we'll start to see this autonomous mobility on demand really being a lot cheaper than owning a car and a big switch. And that should enable our mission again if we make sure those cars are electric and running on solar.
Thank you, Arjo. Now, Linda, of course, electrical vehicles in general help with emissions and help even more when they're powered with electricity that comes from renewable resources. All this is great, but the batteries are a problem, aren't they? I mean, they contain a lot of rare earth metals that need to be mined at scale. For example, lithium is a key component, and you get that out of mines, say, for example, in Chile's Atacama Desert. Is there a plan in place to mitigate those sort of environmental threats that come from electric vehicle technology?
Yes, absolutely. I think mining responsibly is very important, and that's one of the things that Ford we're very attuned to. We've joined some of the coalitions to help ensure that we are mining responsibly. And I think you're absolutely right that electric vehicles in general are better and more sustainable for the environment. A recent study out of University of Michigan actually just went through some of the data, and for North America, EVs, from a life cycle perspective, cradle to grave, including all the manufacturing, the lithium and batteries, still result in 64% less of harm to the planet than an ICE or a traditional gas vehicle would. So I think there's definitely improvements there, and we as companies and we as individuals need to make sure that we do it responsibly. And as we get into cleaner energy too down the road, that 64% of an improvement will obviously increase, and that needs to increase very quickly.
Thank you so much. Now, who in the audience would like to ask us a question of any of our amazing panelists today?
My name is Suki. I have a question. I have more than one, but Linda, first of all, you said about the fuel cells. I just have a quick question because I know with Ford F-150 how much of a big vehicle it is. how are you able to get people to really adopt the use of electric in places like rural Pennsylvania, upstate New York, where we are very much a hunting environment where we put beers, we put deer, and everything else into the back of the vehicle? How are you able to get that uptake?
Well, so I think a lot of it is really about making sure that the truck does exactly what a truck needs to do. So an F-150 Lightning can tow, it can haul, it can do all the same things that a gas F-150 can. But in addition to it, we actually offer a lot more. For one, we're leveraging the battery to provide electricity for customers, particularly in electrical outage situations. We can actually use it for a home for multiple days at a time. Also, without the engine, we're able to take advantage of that space up front and basically turn it into a front trunk. And then, of course, performance in the vehicle is just outstanding. With an EV, you get that near instant torque that we talked about earlier, which gets you 0 to 60 miles per hour in mid 4 seconds. It's fast, so.
So we've got a question from Gilbert in Lebanon now coming through on the video link. So Gilbert, if you could unmute your microphone and give us your question.
My question is, why was the Lightyear Zero released so late? It was expected much earlier.
So thorny question there for IO. Why was his Lightyear so late? Why was the Lightyear so late?
So we set out to build this production car 6 years ago when we founded the company, but we were 5 guys straight out of college. We didn't have any money, we didn't have any experience. So besides having to engineer the car, we also had to build the company. And we've been trying to do the engineering of the vehicle and building the company at the same time in a way that we are set up for success for the future. So we weren't just engineering the car, we were also engineering all the processes and all the systems behind it on how to keep track of this. How do you actually make a car such that the next time we do it, we have a clear process flow and we know how to get there. And along the way, we met a lot of challenges. It's been, we talked about one on the solar panel. We've developed motors that are directly in the wheels. We haven't seen those on production vehicles yet, so a lot of testing and effort went into getting those reliable and working. So overall, I think the fair question is, when we first started the company, when we were 5 inexperienced guys, we hugely underestimated the challenge of getting a car into production. Maybe that's a good thing, because if we hadn't, I don't know if we would have started it. It's really hard to start a car company. I think that's the best answer to your question.
One last question in the room here. I'm going to look around. I think lady at the left here. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Jane from the Royal Academy of Engineering. I've got a question for Jamie about AI. We heard this week in the news about sentient, self-aware AI, concerns about that. Do you think as capability of AI increases, it might actually get bored of driving?
Well, I think that's a fascinating question, a rather philosophical one, perhaps. The way that AI systems today work and will work for the foreseeable future is they're essentially what a neural network is, an artificial neural network is essentially a bunch of multiplications and additions. That's all it is, literally all it is. So the GPU, the graphics processing units that are used to evaluate these artificial neural networks, they just sit there, churn all day, doing very, very basic mathematical calculations, and out comes the answer. Unless there are sort of fundamental changes in how these systems operate, which is entirely possible in terms of research breakthroughs, there's no chance in my mind that these things will get bored in that sense, because they're just doing the job that they're just executing again and again through these multiplications.
Love that question, which brings us perfectly, really, to the end of this program. We've heard about everything from the future of solar and electric vehicles and AI, and even touching on the first AI strike, I think, there. On behalf of the BBC World Service, Whether you're joining us via the internet around the world or here with us in this fabulous information age gallery, please join me in giving a warm round of applause to our brilliant pioneering engineers, Jamie Schotten, Arjo van der Hom, Linda Zhang.